Well, hello. Thank you for having me. So, funnily enough, I'm after Eduardo this week. Last week, we were both speaking at a different conference, Nuxt Nation, and I was also exactly right after him. And it keeps getting weirder because I realized that, so earlier this year, I welcomed a baby daughter into the world, and, Eduardo did that a few months earlier. So then this morning I come down to go for breakfast at the hotel, and I'm looking around the restaurant to see, like, maybe I recognize some faces here. And I recognized one face, and it was Eduardo. So he's, always one step ahead of me, so I think that's kind of funny. So I'm here to talk to you about layers. Okay, just trying to find my time here. So, layers in Nuxt. First of all, I'd like to know a bit more about who I'm speaking to here. So, with a show of hands, how many of you are currently working as Vue developers? Okay, that's expected. Most of you. It was mostly just like to see who's going to raise your hand and who's not. The next question is, how many of you do Nuxt development? Okay, so like a good, third to a half. It's really hard to estimate just by looking out at a crowd. But so a quick introduction of who I am. To elaborate on the great introduction I already had. So I do education. I've been working for myself doing that for 2.5 years now. Earlier this year, me and Alex Lichter, who you'll see tomorrow morning, we started a podcast together. And actually, the idea for it came about from last year's conference here in Toronto. We were just talking, and it came up, and here we are, 36, 35 episodes later. So if you like podcasts, you should check it out. I also do a weekly newsletter with some Vue and Nuxt tips, and coming up on, I think, 200 weeks now. I'm kind of surprised about that myself because there were a few times where I almost missed it, but I haven't missed a single week, and so I'm hoping to keep that. Maybe we'll get to 1,000. That's I don't know how many years away. Public math is always difficult, so I'm not going to attempt that. 2 years ago, I did Mastering Nuxt, and 2 years is a long time in development land, and the Nuxt team has shipped a lot of things since then, and so most of it is still relevant today, but of course there's a lot that is needing to be updated. So that update is coming at some point. We don't know when, but that will happen. And if you buy it now, you will get that update. So just a PSA for you. And of course, I do content in more places. I have got articles and stuff like that. So if you want to learn more about Vue and Nuxt, I got lots of stuff. You can check it out. I'm going to have a slide with my links at the end of this talk. So I've been speaking for almost 4 minutes now, and I haven't said anything about layers yet. So it's time to get to that. Nuxt layers, really, they're basically just these mini Nuxt apps. And that makes it really simple to understand and to work with. You can sort of think of them as, just like with Vue, we've got components that are kind of like mini Vue apps themselves. Like a Vue app is really just a component made up of other components. Well, Nuxt layers are kind of the same thing. We've got Nuxt apps that can be made up of other mini Nuxt apps. And the reason, well, the way that we do this is by merging these different layers together. So your configuration is deeply merged, and all of the different folders in your Nuxt app are going to be merged together. The reason that we do this is so that we can better organize our code and share our code easier, which we're all here because of people sharing code and open source, and so that's always a great thing to do. And one of the key themes that I'll return to a few times throughout this talk is that it no longer matters where we have our code. because in the end, it all just gets like smushed together into our Nuxt app. And so that unlocks a whole bunch of really awesome possibilities for us. So you may be wondering, well, previously we've had modules in Nuxt, and we can share code in that way. And you've probably been using modules in Nuxt with Nuxt content or any of the other modules that are out there. Pina or VueUse even have their own Nuxt modules. But there are a couple differences. I won't get into them too much today, but modules, we have this ability to add functionality at build time, and essentially, modules are more programmatic, whereas layers are exactly like writing a Nuxt app, which you're already familiar with. So if you've got a Nuxt app and you want to share part of that to the world, you don't have to do anything like a whole lot extra in order to get that out there. It's similar to like if you've got a really cool component, you can extract that, put it into an NPM package. With layers, it's the same thing. You don't have to learn a whole new way of writing things, understand what NuxtKit is, and like delve into like a new API and all of that. You can just use the skills that you've already got in building just a regular Nuxt app. So here's a little example. We have our basic Nuxt app here. At the top, we've got some components for the layout. Then we've got a component for logging in. And then we've got some components for our blog. If we wanted to separate this out into layers, we would, next one, we would do this. We could have a layer for just the base things in our application, for the layout. We could have a layer for the blog things, and a layer for all of the authentication bits. And the important part here is that we have this layers directory, and once we use that, then Nuxt knows layers are in this directory, and so it can find them. And then the other key part is to add in this Nuxt config file, which doesn't even have to do anything, but once you put that file in, then Nuxt knows, all right, this is not just any folder, it's a Nuxt layer. So we want to maximize the ROI on our applications. So what does this even mean? Well, R for reusability, O for organization, and I for isolation. Now, if you wanted to take a photo of this beautiful slide that I put together and this amazing acronym, I think it is, oh, actually, okay, wonderful. I think it's the most clever slide of the entire presentation, so maybe I should just quit while I'm ahead. I don't know. Reusability is, so yeah, on reusability, we have layers. You can put them in directories. They don't have to go in a layers folder. You can put them in whatever kind of directory you want. So you can structure it however it makes sense for your application. You can also have remote layers. So if you want to do a different strategy where you've got some teams are in charge of some layers, or however you decide to organize that, you can have these layers live in a Git repo somewhere else, and through some NGS packages, we as in the community of Nuxt can get support for all sorts of different Git providers. I think there are a few others on there, but I don't recall which exactly they are. But you can obviously look that up pretty easily. We can also do NPM packages with layers, so you can just specify that a layer is not coming from your local directory or from a Git repo, but from an NPM package. So if you want to share these packages more widely, or you've got an internal NPM registry, some organizations like to do it that way, you can actually organize it and deploy and share your code in a different way. So O for organization. We can now organize by domain instead of file type. We can keep all of these related files together, which is fantastic. And this just makes everything a whole lot easier to understand and to navigate in your code base. And if you are reading between the lines here, you might think, or you might notice, that this is kind of similar to how the composition API changed things for Vue. Well, I'll get to that in just a little bit. So I for isolation, to be honest, I mostly just put this here because it made a clever acronym. But if I have time, I might share a little tip at the end. We can kind of like, in a kind of hacky way, make some sort of private things. There's an asterisk there, and you'll see what I mean if I have a chance to share that with you. Nuxt layers, I would argue, are similar to, Nuxt layers are to Nuxt how the composition API was to Vue. So it was many years ago, and many of you maybe haven't had the chance to work with the options API and the composition API. In fact, back then in Vue 2 days, I don't think we even had a name for it. It was just how you used Vue, and then now, of course, we have to have some way of creating this distinction. But before, with the options API, we had methods in one spot, and your computed properties would go in a very specific spot. Your reactive data had to go in a different specific spot. And it was really hard to organize it because you couldn't really do anything beyond just what Vue wanted you to do. And if you wanted to share your logic, well, it was a bit of a nightmare. Has anyone here worked with renderless components? Maybe like a show of hands. So a few of you, okay. So if you haven't had the pleasure, or maybe I should say displeasure, of working with renderless components, they're kind of like a cool little hacky thing, but essentially what you're doing is creating a component and then getting it to not render anything because you're not actually using it for the UI. You're just going to attach some logic onto this component. That logic is now reactive, and so you can use Vue's reactivity. It's great. But then you can take this component and either by calling methods directly on it, which is typically considered an anti-pattern, or by using some scoped slots magic and trickery and like, you know, getting things in and out and passing data around, you can get your logic nicely encapsulated in this component, and you can share it and reuse it. That was all right. But then we have the composition API, and now we are able to much more easily organize our code however we want to do it. And this makes our lives much simpler by creating all these composables. And of course, we can also share our logic so much more easily. And if you've used the VueUse library, which I think many of you have, whenever I ask about, oh, what's your favorite library, or related questions like that, VueUse is always the #1 thing. And for good reason. We have all of this amazing, all this logic that we can really reuse, and it's really shareable because of the composition API. And before, it wasn't possible. But this has nothing to do with Nuxt. So let's turn our attention back to layers. Before layers, if you wanted to write a component, you would put it in the component folder. Then you write some composables. Well, those go in the composables folder. Your pages go in the pages folder, and so on and so on. And it doesn't matter if you have blog functionality or authentication functionality. You have to put them in these specific places, just like we did with the options API. And sharing is easier because we've got the modules that we can use to share code, but still not as easy as it could be. But now with layers, we can do this in a so much better way. We can organize our Nuxt apps exactly how we want to. We can create a layer for all the blog functionality, and we can create a layer for authentication, and the middleware that we need for auth can go in that layer, and it actually makes sense how we organize it, instead of just having all of these things live in just whatever folder that they live in. And shareability is also improved. Now, this isn't quite as dramatic as with the composition API, but I would still consider it to be an improvement. Perhaps there might be an opportunity one day for a Nuxt use project. Who knows? We'll see. So enough about Vue and the composition API. There are a bunch of different use cases for layers in Nuxt. So we can do multi-site apps in a better way with layers. So Phil Perkowski gave a talk last week at Nuxt Nation where he has this a demo app. If you wanted to go check that out, you can find him online. Maybe I'll be able to give a link out somehow. And what you can do with this is that you can have a base layer, which is your normal app that you want to give out to every single client. But then, as is inevitable, different clients want slightly different things. But because of the way that layers works, you can actually override specific things in your code base. So if client A wants a different authentication mechanism, well, you can just write a new server handler for that, and you have a new authentication mechanism. If client B needs a different modal component for some compliance reasons, you can do that. You can just create a new modal component which will override the component that's in that layer. It's also great for a boilerplate, because if you are working at a dev agency, then every client project that you spin up, you don't want to start from scratch every single time. Even if you're working on a single app by yourself, you don't want to spin up like everything from scratch. That's always the worst part of every application. You want to get building the actual fun features, and you can stick that all in a layer and just go from there. Micro frontends are another great way that you could use layers where each team is in charge of a specific layer. And then with monoliths, as we've discussed already, you can have just better organization and a structure that actually makes sense for your team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how layers work and how you can use them. The first step is we want to define and create the layers that we've got. Then we extend our layers. Then we use the stuff that's in the layers. And then we actually build and run our app. So step one, we create the layers in our layers directory, or however we're doing that. If you're using NPM, then there's a nice template here that can get you started. It's got some extra stuff in there to make it easy to publish to NPM. And then you just go to town, doing your own Nuxt thing like you normally would, adding components, adding functionality. That part is no different, because it's just a Nuxt app after all. So we've got this Nuxt app. You add a layers folder. Then you add the folder for your layer. And then you got this Nuxt config to turn it into a layer. Add some content, and then add a couple components. And now you've got the start of what could be a really awesome app. But you got to do step two, which is extending the layers. You've got to use the layers in your Nuxt application. So the cool thing here is that because Nuxt apps are layers, and layers are Nuxt apps, then if a Nuxt app can use a layer, then a layer can use a layer. And so this means that layers can extend other layers, and those layers can extend other layers, and those layers can extend other layers, and those layers... Oh, okay, well, I think you get the point. This is what a config would look like for extending. You just put in an array of the different layers that you're going to access. And if you're using the layers folder, then you don't need to do anything at all. Step 3 is to use your layers. So the way that these layers work is that I used the word smushed before, and I think it's a pretty good technical term for it, that the boundaries between the layers are sort of erased, and it all comes together into one giant Nuxt app. So anything that's in any other layer can be used by your Nuxt app. And kind of like overriding things in an object-oriented sense, you can also override things in layers, although it's not exactly object-oriented because it doesn't have all of that inheritance and all of those complex things. So if we have this app here, we've got our blog layer with a couple different components in it. We could add a new component to our app, and this one would actually override the post list component in the layer. So we can have, if we're using a layer across multiple different apps in our company, we can sort of tailor the experience for specific apps by overriding or doing things in that way. Step number 4 is to actually build and run. And I mentioned this before, and I think it's really important to reiterate because it's one of those key things that you need to wrap your head around for like this whole conceptual model of how Nuxt layers work, in that it's combining everything together, which gives rise to like some interesting things and interesting behaviors which make sense when you think about it in this way. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, it no longer matters where your code lives, because in the end, it all gets combined together into this Nuxt app. And that's what the freedom is that we have, that allows us to organize things better and have a better shareable code system. So there's a few different types of layers that you can think of if you like to think about things like this. I actually really love to create these like taxonomies of breaking down things into distinct parts because it helps us to understand that there's different characteristics with different kinds of things. So the most obvious use case, at least most obvious to me, is we can create themes. We can create component libraries and share them as themes, or share them as libraries, or not libraries, layers. That's the word I was looking for. We can have base layers, which have all of that like boilerplate, infrastructure kind of code that you don't really want to touch very often, and you don't really need to touch very often. We can also do domain-driven development, where we've got specific layers for specific vertical slices of our application. Shared utilities could be another one. And then there's the layer that is your app, because Nuxt apps are layers and layers are Nuxt apps. And I'm sure you could come up with more. You could probably come up with as many as you have the time to figure out, but we'll leave it there for now. So there's a couple little tips that I wanted to go through as my time comes up here at the end. So the folder structure, there's two main ways that you could do folder structure. The one on the left is with this layers directory, where you basically have your app, and then within your app you've got a couple layers, and you can organize in that way. You can also go like full abstraction mode if you want, or if you have the time to do all that refactoring. And stick everything in this layer structure where everything is a layer, and your entire application is just a bunch of layers that use each other. So I'm going to skip ahead quickly. Okay, so I wanted to show you this private components thing. So when you set components to an empty array like this, it tells Nuxt that you're not going to auto-import any components. And if you do this in one of the layers of your application, basically what happens is all of the components in that layer are no longer auto-imported. So at the app level, those components aren't available as auto-imported components, although other components can be. And so you can sort of create these like private things where these components are harder to access. You can still use relative file paths to get to these components. So it's not like completely private in that sense, but that's where the asterisk comes in, is that it's like sort of private, but not. And one example on how this the smushing works is that in this example we've got two layers, blue and green, and these layers don't extend each other, they don't use each other, they're actually completely separate. They're used in our app, but what happens is that when we take these two layers and use them in our app, then because of the way that they're smushed together, it means that this blue component can actually use this green button component, because in the end, what Nuxt does is basically combines everything together. So this may not be 100% technically correct in what Nuxt is actually doing under the hood, but it's a good way of thinking about it to understand that these boundaries between the layers are no longer there at runtime. And I'm going to skip to the end because I've got only a couple minutes left. So yesterday I released a free email course on component design patterns. It's a complete left turn. I know we were just talking about Nuxt layers, but if you want an interesting and fun resource on some component design patterns, one pattern per day, and you got some code examples and stuff in there, and I tried to make it like really bite-sized, so you're not going to spend hours on this each day, like 10 or 15 minutes, quick read. So if you want, you can scan the QR code and get that. I'll give you a little bit of time for that, and oh yeah, you can also get it, that's the actual URL. If you want more tips on Nuxt, I have this book that I launched this summer, and you don't have to buy it, but you can get a preview with the first 30 tips on it. And if you go to, where's the URL? There you go, Nuxt Tips Collection. I'm pretty sure if you Google that, you will find it. And yeah, that's there if you are interested in Nuxt. And here are my links. And that's the end of my talk. Actually, I have one more slide, sorry. I brought a suitcase full of my books, and when I say a suitcase full, that's like 12 books, because they're heavy. And so, if you want to come find me after this talk during the break, I think I'll be near the front, and it'll be first come, first serve, and you can get a book.
All right, give it up for Michael. Oh, I love that. Thank you very much. I feel like I spent many years of my life figuring out how to organize components in complex code bases, and it's a nightmare. But you articulated it so well. I'm just like, I'm motivated and inspired from that. But we actually do have a couple minutes. I can take probably one question. That's the first hand I saw up over there.
Thanks, Michael. So my question is about how to not fall deep into the pit of moving everything into layers, same as how to not make every function into composables, right? How to find that distinction between something should be just components inside your Nuxt app, but what is that sweet spot? What is the golden formula?
Yeah, this is a question that's as old as time, I think. Well, as old as like software development, I guess. And my short answer would be, it depends. But the actual valuable answer that I would give is to just do abstraction like that, like little by little. You want to do it incrementally, I would say. So one useful thing is this concept of the rule of three, where it's more useful for abstractions like composables and things like that, where once you've used something or you've done something 3 times, then that's when you create the abstraction for it. With layers like this, I lost my train of thought. I don't think that applies. It's useful, the rule of 3, but for layers, I would say you want to do it incrementally, for sure. And like a strategy that I found works well is sort of as you work on things, doing the refactoring. And that's usually when you are able to do it as well, because it's hard to convince anyone that you should spend 2 weeks refactoring your entire application. And so, yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. But I would say do it incrementally, and maybe you'll find that you do too many layers and you don't like that, or maybe you find that you have bigger layers and you like that. When it comes to components, I've actually changed my opinions. I used to love like super tiny, small components, but then now I've shifted a little bit more to, okay, well, my components can be a bit bigger. And so it's kind of like preference as well. So that was my really long-winded way of saying it depends.
All right, thanks. One more time for Michael Thiessen.